Good evening, everyone. I'm Linda Ben-Menashe, President of National Council of Jewish Women Australia. We're delighted you've all decided to join us for this very moving discussion tonight. I begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to all traditional Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on whose land we meet from tonight. Their presence, culture, traditional knowledge, and enduring wisdom are vital to our nation. The Jewish community finds deep resonances with them through our shared connection to the traditional lands of our ancestors, our strong sense of peoplehood, and our ongoing intergenerational trauma. And that's what we are focused on tonight. Today is International Human Rights Day. Last year, National Council of Jewish Women Australia focused on the human rights of hostages still held captive in Gaza after almost 400 days then. This year, there is still one hostage's body held, that of hero policeman Ran Gvili, and we are beginning to hear testimony from those released about the disgraceful abuses of their human rights that they suffered at the hands of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and many ordinary people in Gaza. As you know, a number of those murdered on October 7 or hurt or abducted were children, Jewish children. Tonight, we will hear about their trauma and its pathways to healing. We will also hear stories of the Jewish children who endured the trauma of being wrenched from their parents as the Nazis advanced in Europe on their way to the most extensive program of human rights abuse in history. Janet Merker will speak about the Kindertransport. As well as being a past co-president of National Council of Jewish Women Australia New South Wales and past vice president of National Council National, she is chair of the Australian chapter of the Kindertransport Association and executive member of its Forward Planning Committee. Janet is the child of Holocaust survivors. Her father survived Theresienstadt, Auschwitz, Sachsenhausen, and Dachau, and her mother was aged 14 when she boarded the first Kindertransport out of Vienna on December 10, 1938, the date today. Professor Ruth Pat-Horenczyk is a clinical psychologist and full professor at the School of Social Work and Social Welfare at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Her research focuses on risk and protective factors for childhood post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, relational trauma, resilience, and post-traumatic growth. Her current projects studying the impact of the October 7th attacks and subsequent war on Israeli citizens. Ruth and Janet will conduct this as a kind of conversation and will leave time for you to join it with your questions. Please write those questions in the chat and I will pose them later on in the webinar. I now hand over to Ruth to begin.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Linda, and thank you for inviting me to this meaningful event. Tonight we will speak about massive, collective, and intergenerational trauma, experiences that many of us carry directly or through the stories of our families. Trauma has accompanied humanity throughout history and appears in countless biblical narratives. But over the years, we have developed many terms to describe it, from single trauma to repeated trauma, complex and developmental trauma, collective trauma, continuous traumatic stress, relational trauma, and intergenerational transmission of trauma. In a way, just as the Inuit have many words for snow, we as Jewish people have many words for trauma. For decades, children's trauma was not fully acknowledged. Only in 1980, PTSD was added to the DSM after strong advocacy by Vietnam veterans. Its symptoms included re-experiencing of the trauma, avoidance, hyperarousal, hypoarousal, changes in memory and emotion, and significant impairment in daily functioning. But I think this definition of Judith Herman, who wrote the book on trauma and recovery. Traumatic events overwhelm the usual methods of coping that give people sense of control, connection, and meaning, capture the deep meaning of the trauma impact. But first, it was recognized as combat trauma, and then women and abuse survivors came forward and said they suffer from the same symptoms. And only 10 years later, the American Psychiatric Association acknowledged that children can suffer from PTSD. And it was in 2000 that they developed even alternative criteria to diagnose young children below the age of 6 with PTSD. We focus today on two major events, the Kindertransport and the October 7th in Israel. And I would like to highlight just several key lessons that we learned about childhood trauma, as well as few major questions and challenges that the trauma field still continue to struggle with. The first question is young age a risk factor or a protective factor for trauma, for the long-term effects of trauma? And the answer is complex, and it tends to be both. Young age can be a vulnerability factor because emotional regulation and memory and cognition are still developing, making children more sensitive to overwhelming stress. Their environment, and especially their parents, are deeply affected, which further shape their experiences and the way they grow up. But younger age can also be protective because young children form fewer explicit memories and rely heavily on their caregivers, on their presence that can buffer the impact. Those of you who saw the film Life is Beautiful, it offers an extremely powerful and moving and fantastic illustration of this dynamic of how parents can protect their children. Ultimately, it's the caregiver environment, not age alone, that determine whether trauma becomes more devastating or can be somewhat mitigated and lead to adaptive coping. We know that childhood trauma is not one phenomenon. Its impact depends on age, on the quality of relationship, and on context. So how does trauma look at different developmental stages? Let me just describe it very briefly. Young children rarely describe trauma in words. They express their pain through behavior, through regression, through separation anxiety, clinging, and changes in sleep and eating. School-age children may show problems in behavior. They can be impulsive, they can be withdrawn, they can be aggressive, and they tend to complain on physical symptoms and pain, and they may struggle with feeling of guilt and shame. And what about adolescents? They may show mood shifts. They may engage in risk-taking behavior, saying, I'd rather take responsibility on my life than let them decide if I'm alive or dead. They may experience difficulties in identity, existential fear, and nihilistic attitudes. They may lose the trust in the idea of a just and predictable world. So I just want to highlight that in order to recognize trauma in children and adolescents, we have to develop a musical ear, an ability to hear the distress even when the child is not speaking it, not in words. Let's focus for a minute on the protective factor of childhood trauma, the role of parents and caregivers. Parents and children are the child emotional regulator. And a consistent, sensitive, and attuned parent is the most powerful protective factor. When parents become overwhelmed, children are deeply affected. In fact, witnessing a parent being humiliated, hurt, or rendered powerless can be more traumatic for children than experiencing direct harm themselves. Let me just exemplify it in this moving slide. It's the mother or the father who needs to regulate him or herself first before they start to regulate the child, and then the child learn to regulate himself. But when the trauma impact and the parents may suffer from distress and post-traumatic symptoms, it really interfere with his or her ability to be sensitive, attuned, reflective functioning, to give a good model to the child, and is unable to regulate the child, and the child may develop symptoms of external and internal behavior problem, and that adds more toll and difficulties to the child, to the parent. As a trauma expert, I would like to highlight that not all children that are exposed to trauma develop PTSD or problems. The majority do not. The majority of children and adults are resilient. And as Anne Mason called it, it's an ordinary magic how children and adults can cope with very severe trauma and rely on their internal strengths, external resources, and support, and cope with traumatic events. Resilience is fostered by stable caregiver, predictable routines, supportive peer, opportunities to be active, to maintain sense of meaning within the community. So after massive and collective trauma, the role of community is crucial in rebuilding trust, in holding on to hope. And it truly takes a village to support and raise a child. I just want to mention that post-traumatic growth also may coexist with distress. And as Nietzsche said, what does not kill us make us stronger. Or Frankl used a quote based on Nietzsche too, he who has why to live for can bear almost anyhow. So we can see that post-traumatic growth can coexist with trauma and pain. I just want to move to the context of October 7. And for me, these two pictures exemplify the trauma and the resilience of the Israeli society. And it was on October 7 that we realized the large scale of the disaster, and we met at the trauma center and immediately started large group of WhatsApp for parents. We understood that the way to help children is through the parents, and started to invite parents to write questions and answers. And through these large WhatsApp groups, we reached out thousands of parents. I just want to give you a few examples of, 3 examples of the questions that were asked. For example, how do we explain a 3-year-old boy or girl the need to run to the shelter? What do we say if the child asks whether daddy might die in the war? How do we explain why children were kidnapped from their bed with their pajamas on? And we came with answers that were age-adjusted and helped thousands of parents. Some of them felt alone and voiceless, and later put everything on special Facebook groups. And actually, until these days, these groups are active and support each other. And there are various questions according to developmental age and context. I just want to conclude with a comment on the Israeli society that showed incredible resilience in the fact that half of the Israelis started to volunteer after October 7. And they volunteer in so many creative ways. Elderly, and many of them were Holocaust survivors, over 90, collected eggs in a kibbutz north and in front of missiles, fearless. Young girls supported families of reserve duty and did babysit. Families cooked for soldiers and provided them showers. And psychiatrists and psychologists and professionals provide large-scale training and immediately started community-based intervention. The intergenerational transmission of trauma is very relevant also in this context as well as in the historical context. Trauma may be transmitted through fear, silence, hypervigilance, or unresolved grief, and children absorb not only explicit stories, but the subtle emotional tones. However, resilience is also transmitted through family stories from one generation to another, narrative of survivals, dignity, moral compass. These messages shape identity, the worldview, the coping patterns, and become of our children's psychological inheritance. Across generation, we pass on both trauma and strengths with resilience, dignity, and hope. And maybe I'll stop here and let Janet describe the Kindertransport context. And we'll get back to the cases with some discussion.
Thank you, Ruth. I will share Janet's PowerPoint if you stop sharing yours now. And let us get there. There we are. Janet, over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar tonight. I send you greetings from all the Kindertransport chapters in the world, the one in Washington, 2 in Los Angeles, 1 in New York, 1 in Florida, Berlin, Israel, England, Canada. Because this month is a special month when at different times all these chapters remember the Kinder. Melissa Hacker is our president. She lives in New York. And as a matter of interest, her mother, Ruth Morley, was on the same train that left Vienna, December the 10th, 1938. There were 500 children on the train, so I have no idea whether the two met. I don't think so. But Ruth Morley went on to become a costume designer for the movies, her most famous costumes being for Tootsie, dressing Dustin Hoffman, and Barbara Streisand in Hello, Dolly. So just a bit of background. Soon after Kristallnacht, in newspapers such as The Guardian in England and The Tribune in America, images of burnt synagogues, data of 100 people dead, shocked the world, but particularly in England. Various English organisations, Christians, Quakers, as well as a German organisation for Jews, even the Archbishop of Canterbury, urged the government to do something to rescue the approximately 60,000 children trapped in Nazi Germany. Finally, Sir Samuel Hoare, a Quaker, proposed in Parliament that the children be allowed to come to England unaccompanied, to be fostered, and with a £50 deposit, to find freedom and a new life. The American Congress debated the issue, and many senators and President Roosevelt himself voted down the Roger Wagner's bill to let children come into America. Their argument being parents and children should not be separated, even in war. Does that mean that in times of war, children and their parents should die together? If this were so, approximately 80,000 people around the world, including myself, would not be here because there would not be any descendants. The Kindertransport was a rescue mission agreed to by the Nazi government. Trains went from, for example, Frankfurt, Vienna, Danzig, through to Holland, where the children then caught a boat. Most children had never seen the sea. Finally, to exit after a 2-day voyage to Liverpool Street Station, where they were met by either families or foster parents, and so begin a new life. In Germany, Wilfried Israel, he had one of the largest department stores in Berlin. He was a major organization for the Kindertransport in Germany. He had remarkable friends, including Albert Einstein. But one night on a return flight from Germany to Britain, his plane was shot down by the Luftwaffe and he died aged 44. Also on that plane was the famous British actor Leslie Howard. My connections to the Holocaust run deep. I have 3 members of my family who were saved because of the train. My mother, top right, exited on December the 10th and arrived December the 11th. Down the bottom, number 26, a very early number. Max Unger would eventually marry into the Morgenstern family, and he was on the first transport out of Frankfurt, December the 1st, 1938. And on the left, my paternal aunt, Francie Merker, who left Vienna aged 10. But I will go into her story later as a case study. So just to quickly wrap up, most kinder that came to England were German. Not all children were kinder, but most were Orthodox. Unfortunately, not all the brothers and sisters could be fostered at the same time, adding to their trauma. They were separated, approximately 36%. However, to go on to a later life, kinder, 16% attended university, 63% found other relatives after the war, so there was some family reunion, but 54% of kinder never saw their parents again.
Sorry, just trying to move that along.
So I would like to present 4 little case studies, which Ruth will then comment, and then I'll probably comment back. The issue of age. These are little children. They look to me like they're, 4 and 5. They've been kept together until their foster families arrive. Most of the foster families preferred girls. They thought girls would be better behaved. Remember, before the war, England had a very small Orthodox Jewish community. So boys were not as preferred as girls. So David, one of the kinder that I interviewed in 2012 was 5 when he was put on a train. He has no memory of the train at all. But the only thing he remembers was being on the boat. Before the children got on the boat, the Quakers were very kind and gave the children white bread, which they had never seen before. Remember, they had only seen rye bread, and cakes, which the children loved, and they ate it. But when you're little children and you're on a boat and you've never seen the sea, well, the little boys started playing pirates. And they were running around the boat. David remembers playing pirates. And then the sea started to surge and roll and they all threw up. So that's his memory of being on a Kindertransport. He didn't even speak at all about his foster family, or very little, but he did say they were very good to him. Rolf, aged about 7, was an adored only child. And like all the other kinder, was waiting for the parents to come. The parents said, you get on the train and we'll follow you for weeks. You go first. Parents never turned up for Rolf. They were murdered in the Holocaust. Rolf became silent, sank into depression, and lived the life of a hermit. He did not have a good foster family. They were cold and distant. Like many of the little children, he screamed at night and bedwetting was common. So I hand it over to Ruth.
Sorry, Ruth, we need you to unmute again.
Sorry. Thank you, Janet, for your talk, and even more so for your important work and documentation. You presented short, however, very condensed narrative of 2 children whose stories encapsulate the pain and the toll of surviving under profoundly traumatic circumstances. I will humbly try to reflect on these 2 brief descriptions. David was 5. He remembered only fragments, being on a ship, playing pirate, getting sick. And this is what young children often encode: trauma through the bodily sensation rather than narrative memory. However, the absence of memory doesn't mean the absence of impact. David was lucky to grow in a warm and loving foster family that provided the crucial safety, emotional regulation for him. And as we know, attachment is a central developmental task, and he was protected. Ralph, on the other hand, he was 7, and he has a strong belief in his parents and that they will follow him, and he waited and felt abandoned and neglected. They never arrived. And his lifelong silence and depression and loneliness reflect complicated grief and attachment trauma and sense of abandonment. And I wish he would have received treatment then in the way we know how to treat trauma today. Trauma shattered this trust in the fundamental expectation that parents will protect their children. But together, these 2 cases show that young age does not protect per se. It shapes the way trauma is carried, but the presence or absence of warm and effective caregivers often matter even more than the traumatic event itself. Just one sentence about October 7 children. who show similar emotional patterns. Their central fear is not, is the world safe? But rather, are my parents okay?
Yes, thank you very much. Our second case study, although I will comment that the Kindertransport was hastily put together without any social workers, without the sort of social systems that we have today. Anybody that put their hand up was taken as a foster carer without any vetting, without any children's check. They were so happy if somebody came forward. So it shows you the importance of social services and what we've learned since. So the final slide that I'm going to present is a family slide.
Let me just go back and put that one up. 1 second.
My paternal aunt, Francie, was 10 when she was put on a train to go to Holland, where it was arranged she would be taken in by a Jewish family. Francie's parents had already exited to Theresienstadt. She got off at Holland, but soon after, the Jewish family she was with was taken to Auschwitz. Somehow, Francie was saved. She was put on a train to Paris, where, as you can imagine, a 10-year-old girl getting off at Paris, wandering around all by herself, was picked up by the police, and the police decided to take her to a Christian orphanage in Pringy. Now, the interesting thing about this picture is that it's from Pringy, and it was a Catholic orphanage, but the nuns hid Francie as one of their own, and she was saved because of the kindness of the nuns. I received an email a few years ago from high school students doing research on Pringy. Did I know of Francie Merker? So somehow, some of the information I get, and of course, certainly I did, and I told them what her character was like. That's what they wanted to know. And that's what I'm going to tell you in a moment. But it's amazing how many emails I get from people that give me information. Francie trusted no one, listened to no one except my father, had love for no one. Although she lived alone, she had 1 or 2 friends, but she mistrusted them anyway and she didn't like them. She became an alcoholic and a smoker. And at her funeral, and it's very true, I said her closest friends were Johnny Walker and Peter Stuyvesant. I didn't mean disrespect, but that was Francie. And despite that, she died aged 93. My mother was age 14 when she left Vienna on the first Kindertransport. She well understood the anti-Semitism around her, that she couldn't attend school, that she had to walk in the gutter. After leaving the Hook of Holland, she boarded the boat called the Prague and arrived in England on December the 11th. Now, the December the 11th is a very important day for my mother. It's the day our sister was born, and yet every December the 11th, she didn't flinch or cry or say anything about the Kindertransport. In fact, she spoke very little. December the 10th was the last time she would ever see her mother again. My mother loved, and this was interesting also for me, that I found this out very late in life, that my mother loved her foster family. He was an Anglican priest and 3 beautiful girls, so much that she allowed herself to be converted to the Anglican faith. She had rosaries. And she would go to church every Sunday. It was like she had given away her culture, her religion, because she felt maybe the Nazis had given her away. She had no home, no family to go back to. However, she did return to the Jewish religion when she married my father, and had her rosaries and Jewish faith running side by side. So 2 very different case studies than the first. So I'll hand back to Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you, Janet. Francie was 10. She endured repeated trauma and ruptures. She went through separation, loss of foster family, hiding, fear, ongoing threats. She really suffered from what we call developmental trauma, complex trauma, chronic stress, and that shaped personality over time. The later difficulties with trust and relationship and substance abuse, addiction, reflect the long-term impact of attachment disruption. She could not trust anybody. And of course, this addiction was the only source of comfort for her, sadly. Regina was older. She was 14 and capable of understanding the trauma and the danger that she was facing. And luckily, she formed very deep bond with her Anglican foster family and converted. That's kind of an act the children may do in order, or adolescent, to reshape their identity in order to find safety and attachment. Yet she carried a lifelong silent grief and inner conflict. I guess December 10 was both the day of trauma that she left her mother forever and also the day of the survival. But the rescue may serve the body. But it can also injure the identity. Both girls lost parents, they lost language, they lost culture, they lost continuity in life, and that created a narrative void, a profound wound to identity. And each of them tried to cope in her own way with the resources that she had, with the attachment serving as the primary survival pathway. I just would like to conclude it by saying that children that face trauma may lose their primary and most crucial attachment figures. And it's our responsibility as a society to support them in rebuilding the attachment, the continuity in life, the meaning, the connectedness, the identity, in order to build their life narratives with a knowledge of the pain and loss, but also with new meaning and hope.
Thank you, Ruth. And thank you, Janet. I might go now to some of the questions that have come in. Some have come directly to me and some have gone into the general chat. Devora says, I'm wondering if you might be able to touch on how trust was or can be rebuilt for Jewish children who have experienced, or children generally, who have experienced trauma, whether those on October 7 or as part of Kindertransport. Ruth, you're probably best
Ah,
placed to answer that one.
well, I think this is a major and most central and important question because October 7 for us was a betrayal. I was born in Israel and went through lots of war and military operations, but we always trusted the system, the IDF. The betrayal of October 7 is very severe, and therefore, this is where the effort should be directed to. Community should come together, and you could see that the community of the kibbutzim who stay together are processing the pain and trauma in different ways. And it's the responsibility of the leaders and the community leaders to go to make lots of effort to rebuild trust in the authorities, in the communities, in ourselves. And I think this is our major and most important challenge nowadays. I trust the people. And that's why, for me, the demonstration and the volunteerism and helping others, this is the major trust.
Right. Janet, you wanted to add something?
Just very briefly, that the Kindertransport Association is a life for, helps kinder to connect to each other, to perhaps build trust by speaking out to each other, by sharing their experiences, and by helping other refugee children who are not Jewish find safety, because children should not be a part of war.
Yeah.
Um,
Helping others is so important. And also taking responsibility on what happened.
Maybe another question for Janet this time, from Karen Freya. I'm interested in the trauma these children may have carried. We tend to hear only the happily ever after narrative, yet it feels unlikely they all came through untouched. Why are their stories so absent?
Number one, the association only formed in the 1980s, when they finally started very slowly to talk. Some have written books. I think if anybody would ask me, what is your research based on, I'd say on the reading of their testimony, and of course of meeting them. But not all of them had a happy life and a happy adult life. Why this happens, I can understand the importance of the quality of the foster and closely connecting to another family. I'm not sure if I answered the question.
Ruth, do you want to add anything to that? Why these stories aren't?
I think Janet did a perfect job.
Okay.
Okay.
I must say, I'd just like to say there were, sometimes I can't follow through all of the names. Some of the names I haven't shared with you deliberately, but there were two little children in baskets with expressed milk in bottles, beautifully dressed, thrown into the train in Munich. They were probably only, a couple of weeks old. The kinder took the children in. They had no papers. And my latest reading was that they lived out their lives as adult women in England. So they made it. And the mother didn't. She was murdered in Auschwitz. So I'm sorry, sometimes I can't always give you. There are a lot of requests now that we get because people are starting to want to write a PhD and they want people to come forward. Unfortunately, a lot of the kinder aren't there anymore, so it's up to the K2, my generation, to give them whatever support I can.
Yes, thank you. There's a question here also about nature versus nurture. You mentioned, Ruth, that, there's internal resilience and that, not all children who suffer trauma have PTSD. What is it? We've talked a lot about the nurture element. What is it internally? Has there been any study on what is it that gives children natural resilience?
Yes, of course, this is the central question in science, nurture versus nurture. And in resilience, it's true too. What is resilience? Is it a list of protective factors? Is it describing a process? Is it describing an outcome? That's a big question regarding resilience. But when you look at protective factors, there are many who were researched. Some of them are internal. It's the ability to regulate emotions. It's kind of physical ability, and they are now looking at not just genetic and physiology, but epigenetic factors. It has to do with intelligence, and I don't like to mention it because we cannot do something about it. We psychologists are focusing on factors that we can change. And of course, the environment, optimism, active coping, flexibility, ability to help others, social capacities, all of these are very relevant to the ability of the child and the adult to cope better and to receive more social support. If there is something that is most helpful after trauma, is the social support. That's the most effective way. And if people know how to ask for help and mobilize the help and enjoy the help and the support, they can cope better. But truly, there are individual differences, and people are born with individual differences, and there are stronger and more vulnerable people to begin with, including the neurobiology system.
Right. Thanks, Ruth. I'm going to throw to Caroline Lewis, who has her own story to tell.
Hi. My brother's also online from Austria, so we have the same mother, maybe different experiences. My mum was on probably on the same train as Janet. She's met Janet. She's been interviewed by Janet when she visits Australia. She lives in London. But she was put on the Kindertransport to London. She was put into a home in Lincolnshire, which she hated. She was there with her friend who'd come from Vienna with her. And my mum did not want to live in that house. And I was wondering about this trauma thing, whether I think she came from a very loving home. They lavished her with not so much hugs and stuff, but all the writings of the letters have always been very loving. And I think going into someone else's home where they didn't receive the same level of love or the same, I don't know, wheat bix at breakfast, who knows? My mum was kind of quite fussy, and she put her hand up to the social worker and said, I don't want to stay here. And so she was traipsed off back to probably Harwich or wherever. And then she was put into, she said, I want to make Aliyah. I want to go to Palestine. I'll go on a Chavara up in Lord Balfour's house up in Scotland. He opened up for 60 kids. And I actually think that was her survival mechanism, as you were saying, Ruth, about the social aspect, that it was probably better for her to live with a group of people, of peers, than it was for her to grow up in someone else's home, not feeling that love. And she always talked about how incredible her teachers were, how much she appreciated the headmaster who took her out. I don't know about pedophiles in those days, but he took her out as a secret for her birthday, her 14th birthday, took her to a tea house with a friend and another teacher, and with all good intentions, I have to assume. And, I still have all those letters, every single letter that went between her and her parents. Oh, from her parents, not the ones that went back. But I just wanted to share that because I can't really encapsulate the trauma other than she wasn't a blueprint for me for parenting because she didn't have any other blueprinting. And so I think she just had a survival mechanism, very stoic. Her mother was like, her mother had her husband in Dachau, her daughter on a Kindertransport train, her parents in Hungary, trying to work out where they were going, and she did a lot. So my mum wanted to do the right thing by her mother and not cause any trouble. My mum is 100. She'll be 101 next month. She was in Sydney this year for her 100th birthday, or just after, and I'm very proud of her in that sense of what she's puts her mind to. She's still got a 13-year-old's mind. She's a child.
Caroline, if I can say, it's such a remarkable story of strength and ability to choose. What is fundamental in the experience of trauma is being helpless. You cannot do anything. And what is central in all trauma treatment is to giving back the ability to choose and to be active. Your mother unbelievably took her right to choose and was active in choosing her future. This is a remarkable resilience aspect. I'm so amazed by her. And apparently she did it further. She controlled her life despite everything, which is antidote to being traumatized.
Wow. Thank you for that.
She's a very down-to-earth, straight-talking woman, and quite a few kinder marched themselves back to Bloomsbury House and said, find me another person. This is not working out, and Bloomsbury House did. So yes, she's
Janet, can I
remarkable.
just direct to you one final question, actually, looking at the time. So, Janet, were there any children for whom foster families couldn't be found? And if so, what happened to them?
So if a foster family wasn't found, if the children, for example, were 14 or 15, together they went usually on a farm and were prepared for Hakshara, were prepared to soon to be transferred to Israel. The younger ones, I think they were all found. Little boys were usually put in a Chabad together, so maybe 10 or 12 boys. That's how they did it. They used to group them together. But no, I think the younger ones, particularly the younger ones, the British people felt, okay, I can do this.
Maybe I can ask Janet a quick question. You mentioned that some of the children were brother and sister and they were kept together. Do you know what happened with them? Because if they are growing together with a sibling, that can make a big difference.
Let me get back to my numbers. Just 31% of children arrived alone. 36% of children were separated from their siblings on arrival. They just didn't have the numbers of foster carers. So it was a big trauma for these children. I don't know where I am. What's happened here? It was a big trauma for these children to lose their parents and now to lose their little brother or sister.
And those who
Yeah.
kept together, do you know
No,
about cases that kept together?
I don't have case studies, but there are all sorts of case studies on the website. I must admit, most of my knowledge comes from actually meeting the kinder at workshops and at conferences. But I'm sure there would be a case study on the website.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth and Janet. I've got the honour of closing tonight. My name's Leora Miller and I'm the Vice President of National Council of Jewish Women. My sincere thank you to Ruth and Janet for such powerful presentations and such an interesting way that you interacted with Janet giving a case study and Ruth, you giving a diagnosis. Janet, seeing your photo of a young boy tagged as a piece of luggage, I found really confronting, children being catalogued to be rescued. You both reminded us that trauma can span generations and that some will never recover. Others, however, are able to rebuild and approach their future with resilience and determination, often dependent on their access to supportive social structures and, as you said, Ruth, the ability to take control of their lives. We leave today honouring the children of the past and standing with the children of today by continuing to speak out, show support and show up. Thank you for being part of this very meaningful event. Our audience may also be interested in joining the Australian Friends of Hebrew University's short course in trauma and resilience. It's a 2-week course in the middle of next year, and Linda will put a link into the chat about that summer course. National Council will return next year with a fabulous program of monthly webinars. We will send out a recording of this webinar and there'll also be an opportunity with a link to join your state body if you aren't already a member. That way you'll be notified of everything that's going on both in your state section and federally. You will also gain access to Esther Speaks, our monthly newsletter written so deftly by our President Linda, which details all our activities for the last month. And finally, I'd like to close tonight by wishing everybody a happy Hanukkah and a Merry Christmas to all our allies, and above all, a safe, healthy and hopeful new year for all of us. Good night.
Good night. I'd like to say my personal thanks to Ruth for, somebody said it's been an emotional webinar. I'm sitting here schwitzing. I'm so emotional, but thank you so much. You've helped me understand a lot.
Thank you for sharing the story that should be documented and shared from generation to generation.
Yeah, okay. So I have written a book. Would you like me to send it to you, Ruth? I will, it's on my mother's side of the family. It's about the Morgan
Yes.
Street.